and imagining yourself outside of that system becomes the same as questioning the validity of the system itself. It becomes hard to separate what we think we want and what we're told we want, even when they often overlap, as they clearly do with Cora. And it's an identity which is highly dependent on external validation, on how others perceive her, on how she fits into the idea of how they think she should be, on her successes, on failures, on how much she measures up to the standards set by destiny. Even Cora, competing in that pro-bending arena, arises from her need for validation as the most powerful bender. As if by winning she affirms her value as the most powerful person in the room, as a bender. It's a microcosm of how she values herself. Being the Avatar means you don't get to be a person in the same way others do. From the youngest age possible, she took on the maximum responsibility for the world and measured herself against it. This is filling the boots of someone else and convincing yourself they belong to you. Which is why Korra's psychological journey is all about that one question. What happens when your identity is shattered? When you can't
dude, I gotta find all the EX
that you
stuff
were
at
born
some
for,
point.
that every part of you is made to fit into. When everything you
I
find
really should
yourself
take a
by is
picture.
taken from you,
Kelton,
as
where is
Korra
he? He
breaks
should be
under the
here.
weight of a destiny she thought she chose.
But I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing half the time. It seems like I should be wiser.
This psychological deconstruction begins in small ways before it escalates. Korra finds herself pitted against Amon, an anti-bending revolutionary, but more importantly,
The
someone
kimono
who
physics aren't working.
someone who poses a threat to her core identity in a way she has never had to face
that's
before in her
annoying.
life. She was prepared to lose a fight when arriving in Republic City. That's just part of being on the front lines. But not lose the thing which made herself useful in her mind, which made her valuable to others, to the world, which gave her purpose and the ability to effect change. It is the source of self-esteem and self-concept for her. But it's a self-concept which can now be taken from her. Driven by that fear and by that pride, by this desire to immediately step up, Korra challenges him onto a duel, doing exactly what she was raised to believe the Avatar should. Aang faced Ozai directly and he won. Kyoshi faced Chin the Conqueror and won. Roku didn't directly confront Sozin, and that led to the 100-Year War. If she doesn't act now, then she's going to be suffering that same fate. The failure to act is the ultimate failure of an Avatar in her mind. But then, she loses.
I mean, we don't know whether or not she knows the history of the avatars. I mean, she definitely didn't know one, but then again, not a lot of people seemingly did. And well, considering how coddled she was as a child, I suppose it's believable to know that she might know enough history.
Because Von allowed her to, with not even the threat of her in the future being enough to deter this man. And if that's the case, then how strong is she really when people like this look at her and they shrug? This identity she developed gave her a sense of high self-efficacy. This is the idea that she is very capable at effecting change in her own life. But the first time she really tries to do something, she finds herself incapable. But this is just an extension of Korra's broader struggles. She arrives in Republic City and finds it a place which thinks very little of the Avatar as an important role, going against everything she thought that she was trained and led to believe about who she was and the place she was meant to occupy. The police arrest her for trying to solve problems in the wrong way, and then politicians do not even view her as someone who is entitled to authority to help make decisions about the world.
Korra, shouldn't be here. This is a closed meeting.
And worse, the equalist movement is not something which can be solved through decisive shows of power. If anything, they make it worse and give the equalists even more support. Korra feels it's her responsibility to solve these issues, but is woefully ill-equipped, especially because during a conflict between benders and non-benders, she's kind of the ultimate bender, the ultimate foe here. Korra struggles with morally complicated situations, like when Tarlok proposes increasingly authoritarian measures to control this anti-bending revolution, rounding people up and violent house-raiding tactics. At first, Korra supports him, this show of law and order and decisive action, but it soon becomes clear that this is not the way either. She finds herself in a no-win situation where she feels increasingly powerless and incapable.
Please help us! You're our Avatar too!
Many gifted kids and prodigies grow up under really high expectations, which they internalize into their sense of self from very early on. When their performance doesn't match the ideal of who they should be and how well they should perform, especially later in life, or if the world doesn't provide an easy place for them to thrive based on those skills, this can lead to role strain and role confusion, tension between our capacity to meet expectations and the reality, especially if we don't feel that there is room for us in the role we thought we were intended for. In that, we become overly self-critical, obsessive, even self-destructive. The problem isn't the identity that they've pinned themselves to, they say. The problem has to be them. Because if it is the identity, who else are they? Have they spent their life training to be? Are their successes really their own if they don't even matter? Cora is nothing else if not the quintessential gifted kid prodigy who thinks they're destined for a certain role in
This is
the
the first
world.
time
She
even
excelled
the
in it
Misra
from a young
outfit
age. She didn't struggle with taking up the mantle of
is having
responsibility
physics
like they
struggles.
did. She is built for this role, built by herself and by everyone else, and she has the drive and moral fortitude to stand up for the little guy. But that identity is deeply dependent on context and how others view her, a social environment that allows her to fulfill it. To give you an example, parent is a role that people often mold themselves for. So when children move out of home, parents often enter a period of role confusion, having to redefine themselves without the people and the context to think of them as a parent. Cora has been raised with this idea of what it means to be the Avatar, but that doesn't really fit into the reality of the public city, or even the conflicts that she's facing. Her bending can't solve political unrest, or authority and values can't solve complex social issues which go back generations. She prepared herself for a world like the one Aang entered. A clear good and evil and an obstacle needing defeat. That was easier, that was simpler, that was the world she heard so much about. This role strain often leads to these kids burning out. They lose themselves, their sense of worth, their self-efficacy, before slowly returning to that identity formation phase, which they should have gone through when they were a lot younger, rediscovering who they can be
Yeah, I never
outside
even
of their
upgraded.
giftedness, their specialness, and finding more sustainable sources of identity and self-esteem. Cora does undergo that transformation, that journey, but at first she is deep in maintaining that identity against all odds, against all the pressures of this world, often with less than healthy coping mechanisms. Maladaptive perfectionism is when any mistake becomes a massive failure and their self-worth becomes even more tied to these impossible standards. There's this desire to be perfect in these particular domains which they define themselves by, and it creates this cycle of self-doubt that prevents them from setting realistic goals for themselves. Because realistic goals would be the same thing as letting go of a part of that identity they carry for themselves. The goals of their personal identity, their relational identity, and the duties they have to everyone around them, how everyone should understand them and view them publicly. If all of that doesn't go perfectly, then they've fallen short. So, instead, they tighten control on themselves in those specific areas. They raise standards on themselves in those specific areas. In this, perfectionism is domain specific. In other words, Cora is perfectionist when it comes to excelling at every area of what she thinks the Avatar should be and means: power, fighting, leadership, standing up, but lacks when it comes to spirituality or romance, let's say. And it becomes pretty clear that she develops many of those same tendencies, that intense fear of failure, of not being enough, of her chronic self-criticism. She can beat almost anyone in a duel. She's mastered 3 elements from a young age, so when airbending doesn't come to her immediately, this is a hit to her ego. Her pursuit of perfection in this very narrow, role-dependent identity leads to overexertion, recklessness. Just as she challenges Amon to a duel, she later tries the same thing with Tarlok. That need for perfection, that need to win, need to control, need to prove herself on her own, risks destabilizing her identity as the Avatar, because anything less than being the brave, competent, independent Avatar whose power dwarfs everyone else is a failing in her role. I'm not sure Cora is exactly a perfectionist, but you can see those psychological tendencies creeping in at the edges. One way to understand all of this is through Cora's locus of control. This is a psychological term for how much we believe the outcomes of our life is the result of our own actions versus sort of controlled by other things beyond us. It can be internal, which means that we believe that they're a result of what we do and our actions, or they can be external, controlled by forces beyond ourselves. While believing our actions has an impact on our lives and the world around us is generally a healthy thing, Cora has an overly rigid internal focus.
Potentially, the
She
reason
believes
this is
everything
happening is
is
because
or
I
has to
applied
be
the
within her control.
twinkle
That's
patch.
what the Avatar is for. That's what she is for. It gives her that high self-efficacy and a belief in her own skills. These obstacles and repeated failures crystallize all of that into guilt, into self-blame, impulsivity, recklessness, and psychological
I still
instability
can't
over
really
time.
tell
She
the
puts
difference.
more
Is the
things down
arms
as the
actually
result of her
shorter or
actions and
what?
her failures. Slowly, she begins to lose that high self-efficacy, and there is nothing worse than believing everything is the result of your actions, everything is your responsibility, but not believing yourself capable of rising to that. The struggle really emerges in the later seasons, but we do see the hints, the ghosts, the beginnings of all of that here. She needs to learn which things are the result of her actions and which are beyond her control. She needs to develop a healthy relationship with all of that. This is about her developing an accurate understanding of herself, her role, and her abilities just as much as the world around her. All of this comes to a head when Amon takes Korra's bending from her. Identity is also built around things called self-schemas. These are deep, fundamental assumptions about ourselves, like I'm a skilled artist, or in Korra's case, I'm a skilled bender. Ego integrity involves having a narrative about ourselves which encompasses all of our successes, our failures, our flaws, and our strengths into a healthy equilibrium, a story that we can understand ourselves and our lives through. Self-schema feed into that. They underpin this narrative and give us a framework through which we can live at ease with ourselves, be healthy, just function normally. But here, Mon basically undoes the most critical self-schema Korra has about herself, that she is a powerful bender, that she is a competent avatar, that the world needs her. All of this leads to a collapse in Korra's ego integrity.
I told you I would destroy you.
This often precipitates depression, despair, and other more destructive things, and we see that play out in Korra. We see it hinted at. What is the point of her now? To the extent that she even believes that Mako would refuse or even want to be her friend now because she's not the Avatar.
I mean, go away. Back to Republic City. Get on with your life.
Talking about
I'm not the Avatar anymore. You don't need to do favors.
She flees into the wilderness, to the edge of a cliff. There's this one shot of her tears falling into the depths, and you could read this as her contemplating taking her own life. People take their own lives for a lot of complicated reasons, but a recurring theme is the loss of role in them, the collapse of ego integrity, of those self-schemas underpinning them. This is why it's connected to job loss or to the loss of loved ones. It's not just despair. Psychologically, it's the loss of a context in which we imagine ourselves. It's the loss of the ability to say, I am a competent accountant. It's the loss of the ability to say, I am a good father. Rebuilding identity from that fundamental level is hard, incredibly hard. And sometimes we aren't able to. Korra gets her powers back from Aang, and psychologically speaking, because of how quickly this happens, I think she basically resists the opportunity to really reconsider who she is outside of her powers. She's still deep in that identity maintenance, and even though there is this massive thing kind of pointing her to have to reconsider all of this gives her an out. It becomes a blip in her identity maintenance, a sigh of relief where she can say, actually, no, I'm fine, I've maintained that myself, I got out of that. She may discover her spiritual side in her lowest moment, but this isn't a fundamental challenge to who she should be. If anything, it only reinforces it. It makes her cling to that identity even harder because she knows how close she got to losing it. Never again, she swears. If you've ever almost lost everything you define yourself by, a person, a context, a job, an opportunity, but then you get it back, you'll know what that moment of despair feels like. The moment of real reflection doesn't really come for Korra until the end of Season 2, when she faces down against Unalaq. Rather, the Avatar spirit is torn from her, spirit and body, her link to the past avatars severed, destroyed in front of her eyes. This role strain is almost worse than losing her bending here. She doesn't just feel like she's failed in her role, but she's failed every avatar before her, the whole world in the past, present, and future, and there is no real coming back from her for this. There is no cure to bring back the past avatars like there was with her bending. This is a weakness. Those self-schemas almost collapse for her, but Tenzin helps her finally re-examine this identity that she has clung to for so long.
Let go of your attachment to who you think you are and connect with your inner self.
Why is this
Rava is not who
happening?
you are. You have always been strong, unyielding, and fierce. Before he fused with Rava, Mark was just a regular person. He wasn't defined by Rava. Don't bend the elements, but the energy within yourself.
A lot of therapy, especially cognitive behavioral therapy, is about re-examining and deconstructing the automatic critical self-assumptions we have about ourselves and the world. The things we may not even be totally aware that we are saying and thinking to ourselves.
Ah,
that
sure,
affect
right,
how we
I forgot.
think and approach life.
This can only ever go to level 1 as
Getting us
well.
to question their validity.
What a waste.
Getting right down to the foundation of those self-schemas in our identity.
It was thanks to me
and asking,
editing
is
the
this
physics
true?
alongside
Here, Tenzin is getting her to
that I
ask,
basically
is she
just
still
cheated
the
out
Avatar?
the
Does
Phantom
being the
Ganon
Avatar
armor.
really just mean being the most powerful bender in the room? Is she still worth anything? Is her worth dependent on how powerful she can do for other people and the world? Is real power all to do with bending, or is it something more? Is she just a competent bender, or is she also someone who fights for justice? Is what really happened to her in her control? What is the most important thing she can provide to this world? This moment from Tenzin is all about role renegotiation, but it is only the beginning of that process. Something needs to give way for Korra here, either to despair or to finding some new sense of hope. Here, it's about looking at one fundamental schema. I am powerful and I am valuable because I am the Avatar, and that becomes, I am powerful and I am valuable because I stand up for what's right. The Tree of Time itself here is a place built for her to relive and re-engage with her own memories, with this narrative that she's built for herself, with that identity. She sees her past and her memories up against the wall, and so she meditates, she reflects, she takes the time to question these things, to understand how these things affect how she views herself and the world, and then she emerges stronger for it. This moment is about Korra understanding herself outside the context of being the Avatar, outside the gifts and the destiny she was born into, and also developing a sense of identity which is not tied to external measures of validation. She can still be fierce and stand for justice when nobody else sees her do it. When Korra asks Tenzin if he believes she can do this without the Avatar spirit, he tells her he has no doubt. Something she has probably needed to hear her whole life, but not truly internalized until now. When people might have said things like this in the past, she would have considered the role that she can provide for others as the Avatar. Here, she doesn't necessarily change her personal identity, values, her goals, her beliefs. Those are still her. But she does develop, I think, a new relational identity, public identity in a sense. She's not just the Avatar in relation to the world, she's Korra. And that has value too. Too often, we define ourselves by what we can do for others. We forget who we are outside of that. She is someone who stands up and fights when the moment counts. This is and yet at the same time, I still think she retains that rigidly internal locus of control, believing everything does depend on her actions, and she remains responsible, even if she still develops a different relationship with power. Like all therapy, her struggles are not something she answers once, fully internalizes, and then magically is cured of everything else and moves on, psychologically speaking. This is only one piece of the puzzle, the beginning of a very long journey. Therapy is layered, is something we slowly unpack over time, and that often we never fully get to the depths of. All of these issues are compounded in this season by the Water Tribe Civil War, where, like the Equalists, It's a morally complicated conflict that she just doesn't feel prepared for. And in a sense, she's told there isn't really a role for her to step into. And like with Tava, Korra makes the wrong decision again, thinking she's picking the side of the spirits, which is what the Avatar is meant to do, right? That gifted kid meeting the reality of the world rears its head again. Her power, from which she's always derived a sense of self-worth, feels more and more irrelevant by the day, and she isn't sure how to deal with that. She goes on with a semi-stable sense of identity by the end of this, cracked but not yet fractured, and so it doesn't really demand a full and deep reflection on everything and how she imagines herself. No, that happens with Zahir.
I'm not the Avatar anymore.
At the end of Season 3, Korra is captured by Zahir in the Red Lotus. She's chained up, poisoned, murdered, and metal which is forced into her bloodstream. The aim to draw her into the Avatar state, ending the Avatar cycle forever. While she manages to break
root's
free,
protection is
the
now ready to roll.
wears her body down. She's only saved by others, the body falling on the ground, broken beneath her. She ends up in a wheelchair, the bending greatly weakened, unable
I
to
can't
get
do
outside.
anything. I'm in a fucking wheelchair.
Feeling that Korra's real journey towards healing begins, physically and psychologically. The road is long and hard. It's easy to view this moment with Zahir as merely a traumatic event where she was defeated. But there's something I think we often overlook. She wasn't just beaten or defeated, like when Zahir kidnapped her or when the dark spirit in the ocean thrashed her. She was tortured. She was violated in a bodily and psychological way that was far beyond mere defeat. Poison being forced into her body is uniquely invasive and still remains there even after she's defeated. Korra's greatest strength, the Avatar state, her own body, was used against her to render her more vulnerable, dependent, and weaker than she has ever felt before. And this unique kind of violation didn't just happen with the Red Lotus. This happened with Unalaq, tearing Rava from her body too, reaching into her and ripping this integral, personal part of her out and onto the ground, and killing it. These cross a boundary which is especially traumatizing and invasive and violates her bodily autonomy. Torture appears to disrupt the body's natural pre-reflective harmony, forcing individuals into a heightened and agonizing awareness of the physical state. This shift in bodily awareness suggests that the pain is not inevitable suffering, but also fundamentally alters the victim's self. Attachment to the body sensations can be interpreted as a strategy and otherwise powerless environment. Has betrayed her. Traumatized people chronically feel unsafe in their bodies. The past is alive in the form of gnawing interior comfort. Their bodies are constantly bombarded by visceral warning signs, and, in an attempt to control these processes, they become expert at ignoring their gut feelings and in numbing awareness of what is played out inside. They learn to hide from themselves. Korra's body was changed from her source of power and
Holy
pride into
shit.
something vulnerable and controllable by someone else. She doesn't feel safe inside it anymore. She can't even cook or dress herself. Her body was powerful, it was the Avatar, but others have violated her so many times that she doesn't even feel like it belongs to her. And she cannot rely on it the way she used to. Unalaq literally tore a piece of her soul out of her. Zahir forced her body into its ultimate defense mechanism. This dissociation from her own body is perhaps the most fundamental challenge to that identity she had for herself yet. She originally refuses to go see Katara at all for healing, instead trusting her body to recover on its own because, it would, and it's fine, and she's not that sort of person. But when it doesn't, it only deepens that bodily dissociation. In a sense, Zahir and the torture did take something from her body she can't just take back. Unable to heal, that role strain, that gap between her expectations of who she should be and who she can be, becomes an abyss she cannot deal with. Shame becomes a dominant psychological theme in Korra's arc here. It's the feeling of being fundamentally flawed or inadequate, where before, when she lost her bending or lost Rava, it was what was called state shame, a temporary and situational feeling which eventually goes away and we move on from. When Korra is poisoned, it becomes trait shame. This is chronic and self-defining. This is new. It is a shame which becomes part of your identity. Not that she has failed, but she is failure. We spoke about self-schemas before, and here one becomes, I am a failed avatar. Everything which happened to her feels like proof she is fundamentally broken. The greater the gap between her identity and how she understands herself, the deeper the shame embeds itself as a lens through which she views her worth. It tells her she is no longer worthy of the legacy she inherited. The world's disappointment is justified because she is insufficient. Losing one's role unravels the framework through which we understand ourselves and the world. The basic assumptions about who we are and what our future holds must be reconstructed to make room for this new reality. It can be a painful and disorienting process. When Korra began with a strong sense of self-efficacy, she develops a lower self-efficacy with each defeat, and where her locus of control began as rigidly internal, here you could say that it shifts to unhealthily external, where she feels progressively more and more that things in her life and the world are beyond her control, that she cannot change things. And yet, this is complicated by that feeling of guilt and shame, and it also simultaneously somehow being her responsibility anyway. She didn't just lose her power, her status, her body, but also her purpose. This is all made worse by the creeping realization that the world no longer seems to want or need her. The Equalists, the Water Tribe Civil War, now she's expected to stand back while Kuvira makes radical decisions about the balance of the world, which once would have been the jurisdiction of the Avatar. The Airbenders are doing her work for her, as Tenzin and the rest seem to go out of their way to assure her that actually they're totally fine and they don't need her and she just needs to worry about herself. But that's not what she wants to hear. In a sense, the worst part is, it looks like it's working. 3 years pass while she tries to recover and the world hasn't fallen apart. If anything, it's gotten better after Ba Sing saved Belle to anarchy, another thing she didn't manage to stop. Confirmation that her role, and thus she, is unnecessary. This isn't so much role confusion as it is role erasure. She feels like she was raised for a world which left her behind, obsolete. And even with that, she is incompetent. The strategies she developed after losing the Avatar spirit last time don't work. Tenzin's words feel hollow, especially because this time she can't just get up and fight again. Everything is gone.
The mind can be a powerful ally, or your greatest enemy.
Struggling, Korra falls back on isolation as a coping mechanism once more. She lies to her parents and flees into the wilderness again, into the back alleys and forgotten villages of the Earth Kingdom, places where nobody even knows who she is. She distances herself from her friends in Republic City, leaving Marco and Bolin's letters unanswered. She only sends a letter to Asami. In Korra's case, isolation has a dual function. It shields her from the pressures of human interaction, hating the pity she feels people look at her with, because with so much of her self-worth being dependent on others relying on her and viewing her as a beacon of strength and justice, this is awful. But isolation also softens that trait shame that she struggles with, because out there, in the wilderness, where nobody knows who she is, at least there isn't the context which makes that shame relevant. In this sense, isolation also gives her a sense of independence she feels deprived of. Even being beaten within an inch of her life in cage fights, that's still a kind of independence and control she couldn't find while around others. Keeping extraordinarily violatory problems, which maybe they never recover from, like torture, a secret, is also often a defense mechanism to shield loved ones from the emotional burdens of their past. But this too is a kind of isolation. Victims of torture often struggle with the sense that others are harmed while trying to protect them, as well as shame over their inability to withstand it. This is something I think we see with Korra, with her body ultimately succumbing to the poison sooner than it should have before she could take Zahir down on her own. That shame mixed with a feeling of weakness. The psychological and enduring complexity of these issues often leads people to a lack of trust in doctors and institutions, which is also something Korra clearly struggles with. She doesn't trust them to fix her, she refuses multiple times the help of medical professionals, and cannot bear the shame of getting them to help. I can only imagine that she never fully opened up about the extent of her ordeals and how it's truly impacted her. This is definitely implied in the letters from her friends, who really don't seem to have a good idea of what's going through her head. Torture interferes with our brain's working memory, with high-level thinking and self-reflection, our ability to imagine the future. Instead, it gets us stuck in the persistent present from which we struggle to rise. There is a loneliness, I think, to positions of responsibility and authority like Cora has, wherein sharing struggles or showing pain can itself feel like a failing in your duties. You are meant to shoulder everything. You are meant to lead the way forward. Her friends at Tenzin cannot fully get it, never will, never went through what she did, and don't occupy the same role and responsibility she does. Even though she sends that one letter to Asami, she eventually isolates herself from Asami too. Isolation becomes the last retreat of someone who thinks they should carry the world on their shoulders, because at
You
least
can definitely just
they're
cheat it
carrying themselves.
with
But on
the
the other hand,
enhanced
Cora's
magnesis.
isolation also allows her to be free of being the Avatar. Yeah, she lets go of the goals and values and beliefs and sense of identity she defined herself by and doesn't know where to go, but she's also free of the immediate burdens of that role. Isolation allows her to become someone else. The problem then is, who? There's a moment where Cora cuts her hair short and discards her waterbending armband, symbols of that previous life she lived and representing this new version of herself. It's actually relatively common for people to make radical changes to how they look in the aftermath of a traumatic experience, especially as they feel disconnected from who they were before and even their physical body, which they're now trying to change and reshape. But the trouble comes in then not having a healthy identity to fall back on. It is instead just reducing ourselves down a lot of the time. Trauma can profoundly affect our sense of self, leaving a lasting imprint both on the cognitive and the somatic domains of the individual's sense of self. Cognitively, individuals who have experienced trauma are often tormented by thoughts that reflect intensely negative core beliefs about themselves. After extended periods of time, it can make us feel like our trauma and our wounds are part of our identity, even more of our identity, that they swallow up everything else we were or could be, instead of just being something which happened to us. On some level, Cora knows she has value beyond her role as the Avatar, beyond her bending abilities. She knows she is more than that. And too often, knowing something is true is not the same as feeling it. And recovery is often about trying to bring our feelings in line with what we might intellectually know is the reality. In this, Cora also turns to self-destructive behaviors to cope. If it's towards emotional regulation during trauma, can include high-risk or self-injurious behaviors because self-harm affords the individual a sense of being in control. The affect regulation and anti-suicide models both describe self-harm similarly as a way of mastering feelings through the elimination of those feelings. This is especially as a way to reclaim control of her body, which she feels so disconnected from. At first, it manifests in things like Cora barely sleeping, barely eating. This is a kind of self-punishment, but also something she can control in a time where little else about her body seems to be under her control. The inconsistency of traumatic recovery can create a feeling of stagnation, and in that, loss of control. A sense that nothing is going to get better. And so, people often turn to more and more extreme solutions. For Cora, that is namely cage fighting. Brutal, fast-paced fights which leave her with wounds and bruises, things which at least those will heal. Pain is at least a connection with the body, with reality. This is pain she chooses. In one scene, she is literally fighting against a shadowy version of herself, bound in chains, glaring with the Avatar state.
Good enough.
Her past and her body being something separate from her. The cage fights, and her fights with the shadow figure from then on, bear remarkable similarities to her fight with Zahir. In her mind, it's him that she comes up against. He takes on the form of those she's fighting, and she imagines herself bound up in chains at the wrists and ankles again, almost as if to reenact her trauma. Re-experiencing can occur through reenactments, literally to redo, by which trauma survivors repeatedly relive and recreate the past trauma in their present lives. Sometimes individuals reenact past traumas to master them. The subtext here is that if medication and hospitalization and water healing did not help her, then maybe by winning these fights, she can finally defeat her trauma and master her body once and for all, take control of herself again and her body. That it's simply a problem of willpower and skill, because nothing else seems to be working. Especially because she's told that if she just works hard and dedicates herself, then things will get better, so when they don't, it becomes another failure on her part. But of course, the thing I really appreciate about Korra's journey here is how it recognizes trauma is much more complicated than that.
The Avatar can wait.
Traumatic symptoms are a complex mix of factors: genetics, biology, personal history, resilience. What is traumatic for one person isn't always for another, and sometimes past events can become more traumatic in the light of new events. Korra faced a lifetime of pretty high-stakes losses, but her fight with Zahir shook her sense of self in a way which recontextualized a lot of those losses in the past, like losing her bending initially, losing Rava in the past lives. As she grapples with shame and failure and feelings of weakness, these moments crystallize in her mind in a new cognitive and somatic domain for her sense of self, a new narrative of failure. Her ego integrity falls apart, with these no longer being things she can healthily remember. Korra suffers from flashbacks. In psychological terms, these are involuntary, sensory-driven re-experiences of trauma that often come with the same fear and physiological response as the original event. Trauma can hijack the brain in this way, making the body and mind react as if a threat is happening all over again. These come in the form of nightmares for her, but they also manifest in moments of high stress and conflict. Anything which remotely resembles her fight with Zahir, Korra's flashbacks return to her in those moments. Amon taking her bending, Unalaq severing her connection to Rava, Zahir forcing his poison into her in the Avatar state. As Toph puts it,
Sounds like you're carrying around your former enemies, the same way you're still carrying around that metal poison.
But there is another lens here that I think would help us understand Korra's trauma specifically, because it can perhaps best be understood as similar to those who have been traumatized by combat specifically. While studies of torture and bodily violation yield many similarities, military veterans, like Korra, have identities built around duty and sacrifice and high-stakes decision-making of success and failure. These identities can sometimes be destabilized when the structure of the military or wartime is removed. Forced back into a more ordinary life, these violent moments take on new emotional baggage. Up to 32% of veteran populations experience symptoms of PTSD, flashbacks, hyperarousal, that sort of thing. Like Korra, their bodies are engaged in battle long after it ends, and they struggle to develop a new relationship with violence, what they have done and the violence done to them. Sometimes flashbacks can take the form of hallucinations. Korra's hallucinations externalize the internal struggle of her trauma. The part of her that once felt invincible is no longer a source of strength, but a threat. She's haunted by a vision of herself bound in chains. It is a literal confrontation with the self she can no longer be, and simultaneously a moment of greater strength and weakness. The self which was supposed to be strong, but was actually the most vulnerable she had ever been. CPSD, complex post-traumatic stress disorder, is defined as a chain of traumatic events, rather than a single instant, a nexus of complex traumatic events all interacting and filtering through each other. Korra does have a chain of events, though perhaps not as strongly as someone like Zuko, let's say. CPTSD requires two negative alterations in cognition and mood. These include the inability to recall key features of the trauma, overly negative thoughts about oneself or the world, exaggerated blame of self or others for causing the trauma, negative affect, decreased interest in activities, feeling isolated, or difficulty being happy. The only one of these Korra does not seem to fit is an inability to recall key features of the trauma, though I actually think we don't know that from what we see in the series. It's very hard to kind of get inside Korra's head and exactly know how she remembers the event. The rest are increasingly evident as she isolates herself. It also requires intrusion symptoms, such as hallucinations, nightmares, flashbacks, as well as deregulated emotional distress and physical reactivity, all symptoms which Korra definitely exhibits. Avoidance is a third factor, as well as reenacting the trauma, self-destructive behaviors. Again, she fits this. The last determinant is functional significance. This has to have an impact on the person's ability to function in everyday life. We see that it regularly impacts her ability to sleep, to carry out basic activities, to even do the smallest things she once did, to take care of herself, to maintain relationships, to regulate herself emotionally. The isolation is emblematic of all of this. All of these things together paint a very complex psychology for Cora. Long after a traumatic experience is over, it may be reactivated at the slightest hint of danger and mobilize distributed brain circuits and secrete massive amounts of stress hormones. Feeling out of control, survivors often begin to fear that they are damaged to the core and beyond redemption. What I really appreciate about Cora's recovery as a story, as a narrative to do with mental health, is how non-linear and realistic it is. Cora gets a lot of criticism as a character for needing to learn the same lesson multiple times. But honestly, I kind of love that. That's what recovery is like a lot of the time. It is repetitive and it feels like hitting your head against a wall. That's what breaking down these assumptions we have about ourselves and the world often takes. We do have to learn those lessons multiple times to get reminded why we had to learn them before. We have to walk
Yeah,
away.
but it's fucking bad
Sometimes
storytelling.
it's hard not to look back. Trauma leaves a lasting mark on
Most
her
of the
body
time.
and mind. There is no quick fix, which sets her
Repeating
apart
plot
from
points
so
is
many fictional
typically a
portrayals
sign
where a
of
character
laziness.
bounces back after a single half-out moment, or a training montage, or a true love's
I
first
like it.
kiss. She doesn't just
Cora
get
definitely isn't
over it.
an
First,
example
she
of
tries
lazy
recovery
writing
through
through
physiotherapy
repeated
and
plot
water healing,
points.
thinking that if she just regains her physical strength and her bending, she can reclaim her former self. Then she tries meditating. She tries getting fresh air and sailing. She tries reconnecting with the spirit world. None of these give her the fix she so desires. The real damage runs deeper. The inconsistency of recovery often involves moments where we feel like we finally get it, we feel like we're on the crest of something, we feel like we've finally come to terms with it, only to then fall back into old habits. Cora's recovery is ups and downs. It is psychologically her feeling more okay with it in one moment and then really struggling the next, mustering the strength to continue on and then giving up. And even though her body might get progressively better over time, her mind certainly goes through a different journey. She turns to cage fighting to force her body into obedience, until she learns that actually the poison is still lingering inside her. A simple solution, she thinks. Get the poison out and she'll be cured, she thinks. That's what's destroying her. But even after she gets the poison out, she's not okay. She's optimistic, but her body just isn't quite there. So, finally, she returns to Zahir, the source of her trauma, right? To confront him directly, to see him confined in chains that he cannot hurt her, that he is not the monster in her mind.
I came here to look you in the eye and tell you that you have no power over me. I will no longer be scared of you.
But this too doesn't completely work. Cora, like many, thinks of her mind and body as separate. That the body is simply a vehicle for the mind, and it's just an issue of willpower and determination. If she can just push her body hard enough, then it will eventually follow. Or that the mind is simply helping the body to do its work, and she just has to get over this, and then her body will be fine. Cora buys into both of these mistaken ideas in different ways. She thinks that confronting Zahir will mean regaining perfect control of the Avatar state and entering the spirit world. But it's not as easy as that. Her recovery requires her to evolve her relationship with her own body and mind. Exposure therapy is a common trauma treatment that means confronting and reframing the traumatic experiences in some way or another. The rationale for exposure therapy is that by continuing to expose oneself to a safe yet frightening stimulus, anxiety diminishes, leading to a decrease in escape and avoidance behavior that was maintained via negative reinforcement. This kind of confrontation can help certain people with their anxieties, their depression, their psychological hurdles, the things which are tied to fears of a particular thing or moment or person. Here, Cora gets to safely relive that moment with Zahir, and hopefully her body can start to learn that that gnawing discomfort of her past isn't necessary anymore. She thinks that confronting Zahir in prison will prove that he's not a threat to herself. Inside her mind, get at the ghost she's got at the back of her head, that he's just a man in chains, that she's in control now. Her visit to Toph and the banyan tree do much the same thing. This is about symptom mastery and affect tolerance, helping her to develop new coping mechanisms such that traumatic triggers no no longer overwhelm her defense mechanisms, and over time, it starts to work. She begins to manage her flashbacks and hallucinations better. She regains control of her body and her mind. It's about learning to healthily reconnect with her own identity. Many trauma survivors are able to mobilize strengths in one domain to cope with vulnerabilities and recovery in another, and I think we see that here in the scene with Zahir. Cora feels more sure in her body than she did in the past. She's gotten back some of her powers, her stature, she can actually do stuff with it, she's healed a bit, and so a physical confrontation with Zahir allows her to maybe feel stronger mentally than she otherwise might be on her own. Cora has to reframe her thinking on multiple levels. She has to become more aware of that inner experience, to question those base assumptions she has about herself even more than she did back when she lost Rava. She has to allow herself to heal slowly. Cora attempted to face her trauma with the same steadfast strategy she has for almost everything else, head on and directly, as something which can be beaten, something she can wrestle with. But her story is one of learning to not outrun or overpower, but allowing herself to be fully present with what happened to her, to live alongside it instead of trying to dominate it, to let go of that incessant need to wrestle with things. That itself is growth.
Lowest point. We're open to the greatest change.
Post-traumatic growth is the process of positive psychological changes that can sometimes come from grappling with deeply painful experiences. It doesn't erase the suffering, and it doesn't mean that the trauma was worth it in the end, which is a narrative we often see popping up in fiction, but also in real life, and that can be a pretty damaging way to think about it. But in some cases, the process of surviving and making sense of pain can lead to new perspectives. Psychologists identify 5 areas where this growth is most often seen. It's in an appreciation for life, improved relationships, a sense of
shrine quest
possibilities,
feels very
personal
Zelda.
strength, and spiritual change. Interestingly,
Having the
spiritual
camera
change is
pan
really
around
the
after
first
you
area
blow
we
up
see
everything
Cora
you need to
grow
blow
and
up.
embrace this. She connects with the Banyan Grove
It
and Toss
feels
Help,
so
then
classic
Tahir
in a
guides her into
game
the
that's
spirit world,
seemingly
he
devoid of
reconnects with
everything
Rava.
classic
In the end, it's her spirit
other than a
that saves Kuvira. She so
platitude.
often focuses on her bending abilities, raw power, her physical capacity, but it's only in allowing herself to reconnect with her spiritual side that she really heals. It's in her strength separate from her as the Avatar, in her empathy, her wisdom, her sense of justice. It's that
Hell
which
yeah.
allows her to save the world this final time. That is the culmination of her healing arc. The fight with Unalaq sees her come to a similar realization, but here she has to reach it again and take it to even new heights, to really get down to the foundations and rebuild from nothing. This growth enables Cora to change in other ways as well. She develops a new appreciation for life and the complexity peace requires, instead of just trying to establish it through force. She finds new self-worth, she leaves isolation and reaches out to friends and mentors, most meaningfully with Asami. But perhaps most importantly, she finally enters that real period of role renegotiation. Personal, collective, public, and relational. She is more than just her powers, more than just the Avatar. She rebuilds her self-efficacy around her moral and persevering fortitude, moves towards a more flexible locus of control, understanding where things are the result of her actions, and where things are beyond her control. She relinquishes those feelings of shame and guilt and self-blame built on damaging self-schemas and a poor sense of ego integrity, and she adopts new, realistic views of herself as someone deserving of self-care and fulfillment. Meaning-making is when the survivor learns to assign new meaning to their trauma and to themselves within that, to the world in which such a traumatic event can take place. Again, this isn't saying that the trauma is worth it, but it is allowing them to approach it differently. For some, this manifests in newfound strength and compassion for others. In others, it can become a new creative pursuit, determined social action, or embracing the survivor mission. I think it matters that Cora's final act in the series is recognizing the wounded, scared parts of Kuvira that she felt in herself. Someone who felt powerless and so clung to power however they could, and defined herself by it. In a sense, Cora does all of these things in some way. This is the mission of the Avatar, and she has to reimagine it and reapproach it. Cora is knocked down again and again and again. She is stripped of every external marker she once used to define herself by. Her bending, her connection to the past lives, her role as the Avatar. She spent her entire life believing she had to be this one thing, because it was the greatest thing. The only thing that mattered in the end, and more important than any one person's individual hopes and dreams. More important than anything she could want. But she got back up. Once, twice, again, and again. And every time it hurts more, every time it's harder. But every time she still did it. Her healing is messy. It doesn't mean becoming who you were before your trauma. It means coming to terms with who you are now. That's what survival is. It's finding the strength to keep going when you feel that shame, when you've lost your purpose, when you've lost everything, to find something new. It's about choosing to be brave when we're most afraid, because that is the only time we can be brave. Just as our darkest moments are the only times we can be strong. You are not weak when you falter. You're just a human who maybe needs a hand up, so that when you stand again, you can turn around and help someone else.
You'll find that if you look for the light, you can often find it. But if you look for the dark, that is all you will ever see.
Mental illness has always occupied a weird place in fiction. Sometimes madness is a connection to powers and Lovecraftian gods beyond our comprehension. Sometimes split personality disorders are a superpower. Sometimes depression is the gateway to artistic genius. It's something I've been thinking about a lot over the years, how we can meaningfully and empathetically portray that struggle, often through the lens of magic, in these fantastical stories. Legend of Korra itself does blend magic and mental illness in its own way, and I wanted to delve into that a bit more deeply than I could here. So I did. I've made a special episode where I talk a bit more through Korra and Cosmic Horror and Jekyll and Hyde and even the Stormlight Archives, What Remains of Edith Finch, to kind of explore how we keep using magic and metaphor to capture mental illness, and how we've done it badly, and what we've learned over the years, and where a lot of that comes from. And that special episode is available on Nebula right now. What's even better is that it's not my only special episode over there. I've got a couple. I've got one on the ending to Game of Thrones and whether or not the books are gonna turn out like that. I've got one on Andor and authoritarianism. And guess what? You actually don't even have to pay to listen to them anymore, because Nebula now does free trials. They're available on my link down below, which button, on the screen, you can see spam. Now, it is important to use my link. And even better, for December you can get 50% off the annual subscription if you're interested. And every account now comes with guest passes, which is this thing we wanted to test, which allows people to share Nebula or videos with their friends, and it's been a mind-blowing success. Nebula, if you didn't know, is a streaming service made for and by creators. In fact, I am one of the owners. A view on Nebula is worth, 100 times what it is on YouTube. And my stuff isn't the only stuff you can watch there. We have
Finals are so weird, don't you think? They're big and powerful. They're often isolated. You'll rarely ever have to encounter them alongside other enemies, at least in the base game. Obviously, this game hates you with a passion. This mod pack. Ooh, interesting.
meaning of the flip monsters. Well, glad you could make it. I'm just happy to be here. Crawler, we have you. Oh, now we can summon BLS. Interested? Right. Well, as you both know, every year we have to determine which of the flip decks is going to be the most playable. Now I see no reason why it wouldn't be me. Oh. Oh, it can't be. Oh, not again!
How nice it would be to have a sand. Some people think Ascend is a lame ability. Like, I really don't agree. While I miss some of the old rune abilities, all of the new things, all of the new arm abilities you have in Tears of the Kingdom are just so much cooler. Ascend included. The fact that it changes the way you think about traversal is something that needs to be acknowledged. It doesn't have to be flashy or something like that. Game mechanics can be cool without having to be flashy. And that's what Ascend is. Compared to Ultra Hand, it does feel underwhelming. You can go through ceilings. But like, if you can look past that, you can appreciate just how ridiculous it all is. In practice. Yu-Gi-Oh! Iceberg! Hurry.
Yu-Gi-Oh! Predicted Nazca Line discoveries. Entertainment inadvertently predicting the future is a phenomenon that's been observed for as long as mass consumption and preservation of media has been available. Looking back and seeing when creators were dead on with predictions, conscious or not, has kept top 10 sites humming along for years. Like when Super Mario predicted 9/11, or Godzilla predicted 9/11, or JoJo predicted 9/11. Destroying the Twin Towers used to be hilarious. Until one day. And while Draco Sack popping skyscraper is pretty close, Yu-Gi-Oh! Has a much better example for predicting the future, tying back to a centuries-old world wonder. The Nazca Lines are some of the most captivating creations in human history. Created over the course of 1,000 years by the indigenous Nazca civilization of Peru.
Whoops.
The Nazca Lines are geoglyphs
Just a normal
depicting
food.
whales,
Lame.
condors, trees, reptiles, and hundreds of other objects, numbering now at over 700. What's most interesting is their sheer scope and purpose. The Nazca Lines are enormous, with their full scope only visible from a vantage point, which is nowhere to be found in the wide-open plains that some geoglyphs are found in. Their designs are far too
Geoglyphs?
planned out to have been done
I know
haphazardly,
this game
so
didn't
how would they have
invent
been
it,
able
but
to
you know,
carve
I
these
can't help but
around
associate
without
it with this
aerial
anymore.
view? Their purpose has also been debated.
It used
for
to
a
just
long
be a
time.
fun
Some claim them to
archaeology
be for
word,
spiritual
I'd say.
purposes, while others
Because
say they were
it's
used to
a
mark
fancy
territory
word.
for different groups.
Now it's the
Whichever
Tears
it
of the
was,
Kingdom
they've
word.
endured as a wonder and mystery
Forevermore
of
in
the
my
world for
mind.
thousands of years. And with a mythology all their own, it was only a matter of time before they bled into pop culture. Finally on to Yu-Gi-Oh! The Nazca Lines served as the inspiration for the Earthbound Immortal archetype. A series of giant monsters with pure black bodies that are illuminated by glowing lines, each one representing a different real-world Nazca line.
Huh.
Earthbound Immortal
That's what they're based off of.
is based
Pretty
on
cool.
the astronaut geoglyph. Asalapiscu, which, bonus fact, is one of, if not the only card in the game with a non-capitalized
All of
word
you
in its
suck.
name. Anyway, that's based on the hummingbird geoglyph. And
All of you
Viracocha
suck.
is based on the condor geoglyph.
Go away.
These served as the ace monsters for the Dark Signers in their arc of the 5Ds anime. Reanimated corpses powered by their immortals, who sought to destroy the Signers and plunge the world into darkness. After their defeat, though, there was one final Earthbound Immortal, said to be the most powerful of them all. So strong it took the Crimson Dragon to a standstill in their fight. This was Earthbound Immortal Red Nova, and his associated Nazca line was the Snake. He attempts to steal Jack Atlas's body for his resurrection before Jack is able to counter him and seal Red Nova inside of his Red Dragon Archfiend, evolving him into Red Nova Dragon.
Most interesting part, though, is with Red Nova's associated Nazca line. See, the snake Nazca line isn't real.
I'm not even wearing anything
Anything
stealthy.
decided to go with
How the hell are these guys so dumb?
doesn't exist. Further, did base Red Nova's design on a snake due to the lack of a real-world analog. For the next 4 years after the Red Nova arc in 2010,
Oh, don't tell me.
would remain true. Until in 2014,
The snake becomes
a
real.
sandstorm had been kicked up in Peru that revealed dozens of undiscovered geoglyphs, including a llama, bird, and lion geoglyph. The biggest one, though, was a nearly 200-foot-long snake Nazca line in the Nazca Desert. This means that 5Ds didn't make up a new Nazca line. Instead, they lucked into making one based on one that had never been discovered.
Incredible.
Maybe the biggest coincidence in the entire franchise. Now they're hedging their bets and the Earthbound servants only original Nazca lines. Come on, baby, I good feeling about Ripley now. Touring Roka. Yu-Gi-Oh, like any other competitive game, can become a cult of personality. A player who's good at the game is one thing, but a player who's fun to watch is a whole other ballgame. It's the reason so many of the popular players in this game, like Jesse Cotton, Joshua Schmidt, and Steven Trifanowski, also have careers as YouTubers and streamers. Even players who don't lean so heavily into social media can build up a following based on how they play the game. Jeff Leonard is a perfect example of this. Even with him only being a player
I didn't mind these in the original because these always met 3 powerful weapons to get.
Another great example is Forbes.
Like on replays, these are so lame. They're not challenging. They're not interesting. They're not creative. Another thing that plus strength of Tears of the Kingdom, I suppose.
From a deck like Primeal or Primite. So why do people care about this guy playing a bad deck? Well, Forbes made Suship his entire personality and arrives to events in full sushi chef cosplay, playing on a wooden board like he was serving sushi.
Oh, we're talking about this
Loads of
guy.
people in the community know and love the Suship guy, and it's earned him a nice reputation. However, the other side is when a reputation turns sour and people start to turn against and even hate certain players. It can be for a lot of reasons. You could be Chris Lofton and be a total prick to everybody you meet and act surprised when Konami bans you for it. You Roy St. Clair, whose cheating stories and American Championship title make him a real-life bandit king. You could even be Luke Von.
What is
One
that?
story, though, is way more serious than all the other ones, because it involves a complicated web of escalating events that ends with a player getting banned, and even more people nearly dying. Cory Roca is a competitive Yu-Gi-Oh player with a really impressive record to his name. A bunch of high-placing finishes across multiple years, especially in 2016, which culminated in the next year with a win at YCS Atlanta with Paleo Frogs, the height of Zodiac format. However, more people probably know him for his controversies in various online spaces, starting with him sending unsolicited dick pics.
What?
Of the 4 people we know of who received them, 2 didn't show interest, and he was outed as a sex pest. This isn't hearsay either. Cory himself admits to sending the pictures in an interview with Mega Capital G.
A lot of brothers now.
Motherfucker?
Now, I did send it from a guy. Girls were ugly.
This is already enough to ruin a career. Pro player Alessandro Di Catrina pretty much never showed his face in the space again after he made rape threats with a woman, which only ended up with him getting clowned on and called a trap. In Cory's case, though, this was just the spark that lit the fuse. Eventually, the story reaches Zodiac Duelist, and wow, you know we've gotten deep when we're finally bringing up Zodiac Duelist. You know that scene in Star Wars where Han mercilessly cuts down into the family pit? And how the bar is filled with, like, demons and werewolves? It's kind of like Zodiac Duelist. It's a Facebook community known to host some of the worst people the Yu-Gi-Oh community has to offer. Cory Roca had his home phone number leaked to this community. What's more, Cory didn't live on his own at this point. He'd actually moved in with his grandma, who was in poor health, and he was taking care of her. So it wasn't him absorbing the brunt of the abuse, it was his grandma. In retaliation, Corey would go online and make the now-deleted comment, "I will literally bury all of you. I will bring a gun to the next event and take down names. I will literally put holes in your chests until I feel better. Then the police will come and take me away, and I'll do life. But you'll do life in the ground." This was a mass shooting threat.
What the
He was
fuck?
going to go to the next available YCS and start killing people until the police stopped him. This would result in Corey Roca getting an immediate lifetime ban. Oh wait, no it didn't. He wouldn't get banned until a year after his YCS win. Alter Reality Games,
Konami,
which was
what?
a popular tournament organizer, banned him on the spot, and he would leave the community almost totally and open a card shop in Delaware that he's running to this very day. Now, what to make of all of this? On the one hand, his grandma was in poor health, he was being harassed non-stop. I understand saying something stupid in the heat of passion. On the other hand, it's a mass shooting.
You were fucking doing that!
He was in a crappy situation and still think he handled that crappy situation in the stupidest way he could. I was just talking tough online, which wasn't going to do anything but give Zodiac more ammo against him, or he was going to kill people! Then there's the fact this all started because he was being a pervert, sending dick pics to people who did not want to see his penis, and it's hard to feel a tune-up to excuse the mass shooting. This also brought in people who tried to excuse his behavior by saying how impressive he was for winning with Paleo Frogs and topping a YCS. These are the dumbest bastards on the planet, and every time somebody uses being good at playing a game to excuse being a fucking freak, an angel hangs itself using its halo. While I shouldn't be, I was surprised to see just how much Corey's story has faded into dust within the Yu-Gi-Oh community. There are no posts about this that have survived, and the only reference to Corey Roca I can find consistently
Honestly, I
is my
kinda just
post
wanna
to
turn off the
Yu-Gi-Oh
Yigas.
subreddit,
They're
or his
consistently the
very
reason the
expert,
game
which is
crashes.
all wrong information about him. This is why we do research, kids, because being wrong is the easiest thing in the world. Cancelled Duel Monsters vs. GX movie. You can get over a lot in this life, but one thing that nobody gets over is that one thing from your childhood that you hated so much, you irrationally carry that hatred into adulthood. When I was a kid, and Ed, Edd, and Eddy had ended, they premiered a new show called Stormhawks around the same time. It might have even been like a week after the cancellation. In my kid mind, I thought they had cancelled Ed, Edd, and Eddy to make way for Stormhawks, and so I hated that show more than I hated anything else. Kazuki Takahashi had a memory just like that, which would not just lead to a cancelled movie, but a huge upheaval in the ongoing series of the time. One of Takahashi's inspirations as a mangaka was Go Nagai, one of the most influential authors of all time. To shorten his list of accolades for the sake of convenience, he's the guy behind Devilman and Manzinger Z, two of Takahashi's favorite stories. When it was then released in 1973, the Manzinger Z vs. Devilman movie was something Takahashi looked forward to for months. But when the film did premiere, he slowly figured out it wasn't Manzinger fighting Devilman, but Devilman and Manzinger fighting together to take down a villain. Takahashi was so pissed off by the false advertising that years later, when he had the chance to do so, he decided to do that concept right. After the conclusion of Duel Monsters and into the production of GX, Takahashi had begun writing a movie that would see the heroes of both series dueling against each other. The movie would have seen Jaden and friends traveling to Domino City, where a brand new evil duelist would have pulled the strings of both him and Yugi to trick the two into dueling against each other. This would have weakened both duelists to a state that the new evil duelist could have taken them out, ending with the two working together to take him down. The movie never entered serious production, thanks to a major sword hanging over the film's head, the Fairfoot Temple. Takahashi was adamant on keeping a Tem dead. The whole meaning of the ending of Duel Monsters is finality. Roll.
past the past while keeping its memory close to keep you going. The very last move of the final duel of the original series was negating the effect of Monster Reborn, stopping the Pharaoh from prolonging his life any more than he had to. He was free to rest. He didn't have to fight anymore. To undo that just for the sake of a film gimmick would betray the story he poured his heart into, and it gave Takahashi a lot of grief. That's why Atem, up until Dark Side of Dimensions, never returns. The final duel of GX is solely Jaden versus Little Yuki, up until the very end, which is just part of the reason many people write off the ending as brief. Bonds Beyond Time takes place before the ceremonial duel, which means he's free to appear. His return in Darkside is as brief as it can be, and the entire rest of the movie is about how Atem should not come back. The question was enough to put a stop to Takahashi's planning for the movie, and it ultimately stopped any serious production. But the ideas didn't go to waste. I've said before that Takahashi did have an amount of involvement in the spin-off animes and their stories,
Ooh,
and it
this
seems
one.
like the ideas from the cancelled movie were rolled into Yu-Gi-Oh! GX. See, the evil duelist who was going to pit the heroes against each other wasn't just a concept. He had a name and a deck type. Umasayo and his tarot card-themed deck. This is the exact description of Season
Arcana
2 villain, Sartorius Kumar, down to the same Japanese name. The villain wasn't the only scrapped element of the film to be reworked. One of the more memorable parts of Season 2 of GX was the mini Domino City arc. During this, the GX gang takes a field trip to the city of legendary duelists, and gets wrapped up in a plot by a group of dueling hitmen sent by Sartorius' sister, Serena, each one of them using a different monarch monster. This pretty closely follows the pitch idea of the gang going on a field trip, except swapping out the duel monsters' characters for the new monarch duelists. The arc itself feels like an anime movie recap arc, like the first two arcs of Dragon Ball Super, the sort that happened completely divorced from the ongoing plotline. This arc is the introduction to Sartorius having a sister, and she's only worked into the story in retrospect, showing up in the duel between Sartorius and Jaden, and then later on during the final season. While the idea of a crossover movie would be revisited in the next series with Bonds Beyond Time, it wouldn't be as a versus movie, and would instead take the same path that disappointed Takahashi so much, the three heroes working together. Good work, Takahashi. Look at yourself. You became the Go Nagai of your time. Vrain's original ending. Yu-Gi-Oh! Vrains is in a very complicated spot of Yu-Gi-Oh's history. It's the final ever show produced to this point that follows the formula set out in Duel Monsters. Since then, the only anime produced are either for the new Rush cards, or are based on the cards themselves, like the Albazin. It's also the final Gallop-era show, an animation studio who helmed the franchise for decades. At a point, this was the only animation the studio was putting out. It was put out at a time when the game's health was at an all-time low. And
Firewall
frustratingly,
Dragon.
a lot of cards people hated came from Yu-Gi-Oh! Vrains. Goki, Firewall Dragon, Gumblar Dragon, Magic Cylinders!
What?
It's also a complete roller coaster in terms of quality, with super high peaks for the animation.
Ain't no way they wrote
character
someone
writing,
using
and
Magic
development.
Cylinder and
And then you
Brain.
get a clip show
Why would
13
you do
episodes
that?
in. Sidecasts were made to look like complete failures. Blue Angel might take the crown for the most disrespected female duelist in the entire franchise, which is a title that does come with 15 free therapy sessions. The production of Vrains was likely frayed behind the scenes, for reasons we'll talk about soon, but those problems reverberate throughout the entire show. One place this was especially seen was in the final duel of the series. The end of Season 2 left I, the main character's little buddy, as the only remaining Ignis, a species of advanced free-thinking AI. Grief-stricken and influenced by the previous villain, Lightning, I ran simulation after simulation to try to find a way for Ignis and humans to coexist. Only to find there was one constant he couldn't change. Either him or Yusaku had to die. Deciding then and there, I planned on ending his own life in order to preserve Yusaku, and so instigated the final arc as a way to force Yusaku to take him out permanently. This makes it a really grim twist on the classic ceremonial duel that's become a staple of the franchise. Yusaku pretty much having to mercy kill Ai, who's given up on living, if it means his best friend will stay safe. The simulation scenes themselves are also super intense, with Yusaku and Ai standing alone in the ruins of society, the world having been demolished by the conflict that would take place if Ai doesn't die. The only thing is that if the initial ending for Vrains had been gone with, these wouldn't have been simulations. This was revealed by a writer for Vrains on their personal website, which revealed loads of production information about Vrains and how things were supposed to play out. It was actually decided on super early that I was going to be the final boss of the series, for the exact reason I mentioned, inverting the partner duel that had ended out Duel Monsters and Zexal. However, the battle wasn't going to be to prevent the destruction of humanity, but instead take place after its destruction. Vrains' ending was supposed to have Ai and Yusaku dueling on a destroyed Earth, after Ai's forces and the humans had practically wiped each other out, with all that remained being the two friends at the center of all of it. The duel wouldn't have had any purpose, no reward at the end. There were no battles left to win, just what was left around them. The duel would have been a game for the sake of a game, before they went their separate ways to live out the rest of their lives on a destroyed planet. Now, the reason you might have intuited from that description about
That's
why it was
fucking
changed
depressing.
was
What the
because
fuck?
that ending was depressing as hell. Since it was the final Calavera show, it might not have been the best thing for its legacy to say the setting was destroyed and nothing remained. It wasn't considered for a long time, but it's that it was considered at all, that it's the only alternate ending named, and that it was worked into the show in the form of the simulations that makes it so interesting. If things had changed just a little bit, and a lot of people got a lot more comfortable with a bad idea, we could have had the final Calavera show ending Hotline Miami 2 style, and necessitating a full-on reboot of the series. It would have made for a really unique ending, but I think the ending that we get, with the ambiguity that is there, is better for the overall show and series.
Yeah, like, come on, man. That would not have been a satisfying way to end what by this point has been a very kid-friendly,
Now we
happy-go-lucky
get to cover
show.
a topic so minute yet so interesting that I have a whole 3 sentences to work with. The second season of Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal feels like a response to the problems with early Zexal. I have no proof of that, and I'm sure that this was a case like with Ai always being intended to be the final bad guy. This was always the intended course. A lighter, GX-style first season, before raising the stakes to a degree they've never been raised to before. 7 of the familiar
Could've sworn I
supporting
saw, like, a
cast that
hole
we've
or
gotten to learn
something
about
where
and
I could put a
appreciate
car
over
rock
the
in.
course of the series, all the way up to the Joey analog of the show, are revealed to have been evil space aliens the entire time. Bent not on world domination, but rather the preservation of their species. Everybody in the supporting cast, save for Kite's family and Tori, are killed by the Barians, as Yuma is all that's left to fight off an invasion that threatens reality itself. We get the dramatic backstories for characters like Vector, Nash, and Rio. The entire Vector duel itself is one of the most intense duels in the entire series. It feels like a completely different show. The only evidence of a major rewrite, though, comes from the NOS website, which, while it was airing, would post previews of Zexal
Why does it
episodes.
always ring when I
Things
get
were
here?
usually as vague as possible to keep from spoiling the upcoming events of episodes, but episode 130 and 131 hold an interesting bit of cut content. In it is mentioned a character named Alco, the Varian Observer. This was a character Dr. Faker would have told his son Kite about in order to get him to seek him out to help find a way to beat the Varians. Alco would have provided a card called the Closed 8, which would have been pivotal in beating Mizar in Kite's upcoming duel. Alco only exists in the previews for episode 130 and 131. He's never mentioned in the show. The card the Closed 8 is never mentioned or shown anywhere. And the card that ends up saving Kite on the Moon is the Number Hunter's very own number 62,
Whoa.
Galaxy Eye's Prime Photon Dragon. What role Alco could have served is entirely speculation. His role as a Varian observer, and Baker referring to him as a young boy, makes me think of a childish third party, was it Varian, Astral, or Human, that had a greater power than all of them. He could have even been the parallel to Dawn 1000 for Astral World, like Dawn 1000 is for the Varians, only now making his appearance now that things have gotten unhinged. As for why he was removed from the show, I think they realized that introducing a character even higher than the Varians, when that role was already filled by Dawn 1000, was too much. With Numeron Dragon already set to play a big role, I think adding a third god, whose only job seems to have been using Kite to get out of Duel 3 card, was seen as a bad idea. This wasn't even the only character removed from Zexal, but left with his own as there was planned to be another spirit named Pro. The spirit wanted to eliminate the numbers as they could only be used for wickedness. The duel that would have taken place between him and Yuma would have been the introduction to the manga-exclusive Shining Numbers, which was Yuma's answer to Chaos Xyz's summoning. Just like with Alco, he's only ever mentioned in
Chaos
episode 3
Xyz?
scripts and is never seen in the actual
Is it
show.
like reverse synchros?
The duel that would have happened between him and Yuma would have been around episode 124 and 125, which is when the Varians launch their attack and start taking out the supporting cast. I guess it would have given Yuma something to do while the invasion was happening, but just like with Alco, it feels like they realized there was too much going on, and saying there's yet another spirit disconnected from both Astral World and Varian World was too much. Now all Alco and Proto exist as interesting footnotes in Zexal's history. Arc 5 problems because of Dark Side of Dimensions fade. Arc 5. In one word, messy. In 1,032 words, Arc 5 is a series that had all the promise in the world, but time after time found ways to piss away all of its goodwill. There was potential. Its hook of alternate dimensions is engaging and should lead to a lot of good stuff. It's the first series to give characters more fleshed out archetypes, like DDs, super heavy samurais, Performa Odd Eyes. It made duels more mobile without the hook of motorcycles. But it is a one step forward, two steps back kind of show. The early promise is there, and I think it's a good show to a point, but at that point, it starts to nosedive in quality to the point of burning up all the goodwill it built up. My brother used to joke with me that the whole series was propped up by Chaos Ancient Gear Giant, because after that card is destroyed, in a series best duel with fan favorite Shay, using a beautifully animated final attack with Satellite Cannon Falcon, the show starts to go to hell in a handbasket real quick. The Synchro Dimension arc is where some of the show's worst moments are, culminating in maybe the worst received episode of the whole franchise, Arc 5, Episode 92. Episode 92 is the culmination of a duel that had been built up for 3 episodes beforehand with Barrett, a nobody jobber, handing Yuya his ass over and over again. Barrett uses a Beastborg deck that locks down the opponent's field, and Yuya had no idea how to beat it. He couldn't get out. He was going to lose. That was until a third guy named Sergei shows up, takes Yuya's ass from Barrett, and also hands it to him. What made this episode so frustrating wasn't the fact that Yuya was losing. God knows he's done enough of that up to this point to prepare us. It's the fact that this was the culmination of getting back the Bracelet Girls. Yuya has spent the entire series trying to get back Zuzu and her different dimension counterparts. It seemed like it was finally going to be the moment it happens, and it does, but then they're immediately taken away again by Sergei. In the Japanese fandom, at least, it was a turning point against Arc 5 that made a lot of people tune out. With the show so sharply declining in quality around this time, people were left wondering why the show had taken such a sudden hit. Well, that's when dates started lining up, with the February release date of episode 92 and the April release date of Dark Side of Dimensions. Fans began assuming the production of DSOD was responsible for the dip in quality in Arc 5. The writing and animation were continuously getting worse because the best talent working on the show was stuck on Darkseid. And the reshuffling is the best explanation for the odd choices made in the show's later seasons. It would even extend to and explain the troubled development of Reigns. No healthy show has to do a clip show every 15 episodes. For a long time, this was considered the reason for the woes of Arc 5. But doing a little digging shows more than a few holes. First off, the names shared between Arc 5's credits and Darkseid's credits aren't enough to throw a show out of whack. Big names that were in both the credits of Arc 5 and Dark Side of Dimensions include creature designer Honda Seiji, producer Jitsumatsu Teruaki, episode director Muto Kimiharu. These are certainly names, but it's not like the entire animation staff was shifted over to work on Darkseid. Darkseid instead featured a lot of animators who weren't working on Arc 5, and instead worked on other series, namely Takahiro Kagami, who would serve as the movie's director. Did losing all that staff help? No, but it wouldn't have been enough to derail the entire show. Even more than that, the actual problem with Arc 5 had nothing to do with Darkseid's production. Missing from that list of shared credits is any of the writing staff. The problems people have with Arc 5 can largely be chalked up to the writing. The animation towards the end isn't stellar, but it was passable. The story is where people had problems. Yuya is a weak protagonist. He rarely gets impressive wins and feels carried by action cards, which act as Deus Ex Machinas, no not those ones, that keep him from losing. What is Yuya's impressive win? What's the win that solidifies him as a better duelist than when he started the series? Yuki beat Pegasus, Jaden beat the Sacred Beasts, Yusei beat the Dark Signers, and Yuma beat Faker. What's Yuya's big win that puts a cap on a part of the story? Beats the quiz guy, and the cook guy, and the flower cardian guy, and after that just duels people to a draw about 10 times in a row. Yuya's character writing is also incredibly frustrating because he's entirely one note. He's obsessed with smiles. Every conversation comes back to smiles. Oh, these children are starving? Probably because they're not smiling enough. The dual writing as well gets extremely repetitive after a few games, when they repeatedly have to explain how piercing damage works. You still take the damage became a meme in the Yu-Gi-Oh community for a reason. The supporting cast has absolutely nothing to do. Either you're Reiji or Shay, who gets to actually duel people, or you're everybody else. You'd be lucky to be a Gong Strong, who loses to every named duelist he fights after episode 57. The show just languishes in pointless duels for a lot of the endgame. When the show should be wrapping up and getting to the big fight with Zark, Yuya's fighting a pirate guy and the Battle Beast. When Gladiator Beasts showed up, I smiled. They brought their bags, the smile faded. The twist that Yuya is the final boss after becoming Zark should work, but the show that follows is a miserable experience of watching a boss character pull trap cards out of his ass to avoid losing. Yuya's Chaz tier rival Sawatori is able to duck and weave around every known effect that Zark has on his field and convincingly win the duel, until Zark reveals he had an extra trap in his back pocket just to make him auto-lose the duel. Any one of these plot beats would have been planned out months ahead of their air date. And just like with Crow Hogan the Dark Signer, it wouldn't have been possible to change them so quickly. Just like with Dark Signer Crow Hogan, it feels better to try to push the failings of a show you like onto unforeseen consequences, but that's just not the case here. DSOD's production likely had very little effect on Arc 5. You wanna know what did have an effect on Arc 5, though? Zipfo Gears! Yeah, remember that?
What?
The show with the Scrap Fist reference? It had a negative effect on Arc 5's production, thanks to Katsumi Ono, the very director who put in that reference. Ono had left his stamp on both franchises and had obligations to fill out for both. meaning that he would have been working on Symphogears GX and Arc 5 at the same time. Want to hazard a guess as to which arc he predominantly directed? The Synchro Dimension arc, where the entire show went to shit. So if you need to blame any anime for the Battle Beast arc, it's Symphogears, not Darkside. Also, since this was going to get its own entry later on, but I eventually realized there wasn't enough basis to make a whole entry for, I want to quickly touch on Magician of Hope. This is a V-Jump promo card that's extremely odd as far as anime cards go, because it's a crossover card. Before this, the only crossovers that would be done between cards would be
That's
in
how
the
I
same
made that.
series.
I'm
That's how you
actually
get a
so
card
smart.
like Dark Cavalry or Shooting Star Dragon TG Expansion. But Magician of Hope is between Zexal and Arc 5. The reason this is worth noting is because Zexal is really popular in Japan, almost as popular as Duel Monsters, and Arc 5 is not. During the airing of Arc 5, the video site Nico Nico would keep a running tally of the top 10 worst anime episodes as rated by their fans. And during Arc 5's airing, all 10 spots were Arc 5 episodes. The
Incredible.
theory goes that Magician of Hope was printed to try to get people who were into Zexal, but not into Arc 5, to try out the new cards. Because hey, it's a Zexal card and an Arc 5 card. You like one of those, you can have the other. You like mac and cheese, you'll eat your Brussels sprouts. Cyber Dragon MF03-EN010. The rarest Yu-Gi-Oh card of all time is a discussion that's been had a lot in the community. At the very least, we know there is no such thing as a one-of-one card, simply because Konami can't let that sort of thing happen. Whenever a new, official Yu-Gi-Oh card is made, they print at least one copy to keep in reserve at a card vault in Konami headquarters. That's the one that acts as a reference for the card's code, and so they always have a copy on hand. Even cards like Tyler the Great Warrior, or one-of-one prize cards like Duel Links Dragon or the Normal Monster Blackluster Soldier have to have duplicates out there in order to have a version of the card on file. So for a card to truly be the rarest of all time, it has to be because of a circumstance out of Konami's control. Two examples of exactly that are with two Neos cards, funny enough. Due to errors when printing the first edition runs of South Korea's Premium Pack 6, the card Neos Wiseman was printed as a fusion monster instead of a main deck monster. Ironically, though, this misprinted version ended up being more accurate to the anime than the actual version of Neos Wiseman we were stuck with. As in the anime, it's a fusion of Yuvel and Elemental Hero Neos, where in the real game, you summon it by tributing those two monsters on the field. Other Neos card that was infamously printed wrong was a version of Chaos Neos, and you couldn't ask for a bigger misprint. This was specifically a misprint of the Ghost Rare variant of Chaos Neos, already insanely hard to pull, but the name would also be printed wrong to now be Rainbow Dragon. This variant from Gladiator's Assault was already extremely rare, going for over $1,000 online. But
I got too focused on cooking because I got invested to the video.
Here, you had an extremely small chance of pulling a Ghost Rare Rainbow Dragon, and an even smaller chance than that the Rainbow Dragon's artwork would be replaced with Chaos Neos. He gets downgraded to an effect monster, but the dignity is worth it for a price increase of over $5,000. Effect monster, Ghost Rare, Rainbow Chaos, Neos Dragons go for that much. But if you're bargain hunting, you might pay over $10,000 for one. Well, that's clearly not even within spitting distance of Tyler the Great Warrior's $300,000 price tag. I don't think it's wrong to say Tyler is a bit of a special case and should be in a league of his own. Other prize cards, like Crush Card Virus and Gold Sarcophagus, carried multi-$1,000 price tags, but Chaos Neos in misprinted form is higher value than a playset of some of those cards. But what could get more rare than a ghost? How about a myth? There's a series of cards released in such an obscure way that are so hard to find to this day, it's speculated on whether or not some of them even exist
There's more valuable rupees to pick
Cast your
up.
minds back to 2005,
And if you were watching the brand new Yu-Gi-Oh! Series of the time, GX, you might have seen a commercial advertising brand new action figures to go along with the monsters from the show. Elemental Heroes, Water Dragons, Chthonian Soldiers, all released by Mattel, all including a card in parallel rarity matching the toy you got. These would make them some of the rarest variants of these cards to ever exist, and the figures would be released in 3 waves. Wave 1 was simply Elemental Hero Thunder Giant. Wave 2 was 4 heroes, Water Dragon, and Cyber End Dragon. And finally, Wave 3 would be even more heroes, because even in toy form, hero oversaturation is a problem, and a few other key monsters. Those key monsters included Cyber Dragon, Ancient Gear Golem, Blackluster Soldier, Elemental Hero Clayman, and Torebo Level 10. These 5 cards make up a group of some of the rarest Yu-Gi-Oh! Merchandise to ever exist, and by association, the rarest cards of all time. While versions of every other toy in the line have been documented, in box and with their cards, these 5 are all in various states of obscurity. The whole search got kicked off one day on Pojo when a user named Maykite was talking about his journey to collect every possible variant of Cyber Dragon, and all the rarities he had ever been printed in. The Mattel toy version, coded MF03-EN010, was nowhere to be found. And digging from the players on Pojo revealed that Cyber Dragon, unlike all the other toys in the line, was only available at Sears. Along with only being available at fucking Children's Wonderland Sears, the already scarce production of the figure meant it was impossible to find a Cyber Dragon with the card in the packaging. 2020 would be when the case was finally cracked, when a guy named Kevin L. posted to the Yu-Gi-Oh! Subreddit revealing loads of the MF03 series of cards, including the core Elemental Heroes and the Cyber Dragon. These photos that Kevin took were, and still are, the only proof that MF03 Cyber Dragons exist, alongside a UK-based buyer's guide that also listed it alongside a Blackluster Soldier. Speaking of which, I didn't mention Blackluster Soldier among the toys with no cards. That's because there is no Blackluster Soldier toy known to exist. It was featured on the back of the packaging of other MF03 figures, but no version of it has ever turned up. It's not uncommon for toy lines to feature cancelled figures on final packaging, but with how Cyber Dragon turned up out of thin air, it's not impossible that it might exist somewhere. And if you think you might have the $1 million prize, don't get too excited. A lot of false sightings have happened because there is a Blackluster Soldier, but printed back during the original Duel Monsters line, not the MF03 version, and certainly not with a card. We still don't have a Cyber Dragon with the card in packaging to prove that's how they were distributed, but that's not even the end of the questions when it comes to this card. Remember how I mentioned the buyer's guide? Well, that lists the card code for BLS as 009, and Cyber Dragon is 010. Meanwhile, the card we have lists Cyber Dragon as 009. For all I know, that's a mistake on the part of the buyer's guide, because it's unlikely they would have an actual copy of the card. But even if I was correct, I wouldn't go voicing it, because that means somebody spent $30,000 on a fake! Or virtual dueling system. Released back in 2007, the Kaiba Corp Virtual Dueling System was a brand new piece of technology. One of the first ever widely available online dueling simulators for Yu-Gi-Oh! Developed by fans. We're spoiled for choice now between Dueling Network, Omega, Edo Pro, and, of course, Master Duel. But way back when Strike of Neos had just released, and the housing bubble was plumping up, the idea of playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Without having to look somebody in the eye was unthinkable. The software had been in development since at least 2004, and was developed by a 4-person team, each one going by a different anime character's name, with the main developer being Seto Kaiba himself. Miraculously, the page that detailed all of this development history has endured on kaibagaming.net, where he details how the game came to be. mixing both actual development history with what seems to be in-character asides as Seto Kaiba himself. This makes discerning fact from fiction a little hard, like when he claims the original site had to be taken down due to an influx of fangirls. With help from the other developers, the original beta for the game would be released in 2007 with a 400-card-deep card pool, and would be in a unique position in regards to the burgeoning internet. The game's early popularity was thanks to the contribution from a pre-established online community, the Tag Duel YouTube scene. I say that the online simulators were the only way to play the game digitally, but the Tag Force games also filled that role. Whether it was character duels or actual games, the Tag Force games filled that niche for people without stable internet connections. So a community grew around the games for the purposes of making videos, which made up a hefty part of the early Yu-Gi-Oh! Scene. When KC dropped, these bigger channels would slowly figure out about it and post about it, showcasing the ease of use and availability to a bigger audience than forum word of mouth could. Soon a large community would form around the simulator that would subdivide itself into various groups. A group on the main forum, hosted on the same site as the download, a group of splinter forums themed around the various houses at Duel Academy, a regular tournament scene, YouTube videos cataloging them. In the early days of the internet, the Kaiba Corp virtual dueling system was the biggest hub for members of the community to play. The simulator itself was rudimentary, but expectedly so. Kaiba and the team had to build it without the luxury of a reference point that newer simulators like Omega have. Features like automatic play and a robust card pool weren't standard. Instead, players had to manually enter every command taken in the game, and instead of an add or subtract function for life points like with Dueling Book, KC had you entering a command line to perform these functions. In order to even access the game's server, you would have to download a third-party VPN called Hamachi that did the work of actually connecting one player to another. The community for a long time was flourishing. Eventually, those different Academy forums would start a global ranking system that would rank each forum against each other. A system popular enough to get incorporated into the main program itself as the Kaiba Corp Team Academy universe. However, since this is likely the first time you're ever actually hearing of this simulator, you'd rightly assume something went wrong. If you were unlucky enough to be playing KC at the wrong time, you'd run into a user named Kira. Kira would enter rooms, reveal all 5 pieces of Exodia, and instantly win. If you didn't, Kira would tell you all the cards in your hand that you had set and on top of your deck. Kira could do this because he had gotten his hands on a cheat engine that allowed him to mess with the game in loads of different ways. With the safety of the program compromised, a program that had you entering your IP address to play, all major tournaments and play ceased while Kaiba and the team looked for how to solve the problem. The cheat engine, though, was later shared by Kira with different members of the community, and from there, trust eroded and people began leaving the service for newly available options. Yu-Gi-Oh! Virtual Dueling was a piece of software that had existed since at least 2005, 2 years prior to KC, and had been receiving constant updates. The very early forms of what would become Percy and YGO Pro were just taking off, and in a year or two, Dueling Book would launch. Dueling Book isn't just a footnote in the story of KC, though, as if you go by the word of Kaiba himself, he'll tell you they had a hand to play in the service's downfall. With KC predating Dueling Book by 4 years with its launch in 2011, Dueling Book would have to find a way to convince people to use it over a service like KC. Kaiba alleges that the team behind Dueling Book were the ones behind the cheat engine that killed KC, and distributed it as a way to draw attention away from the game and onto their new simulator. These allegations are all made in old, deleted forum posts, as going to the KC forums now reveals maybe 7 posts overall. These posts, though, you might realize, are all from at least the past year. I was just scanning it to get an idea of what it was like, and then I noticed they were talking about adding Genesis support, and
Wouldn't you guess it, Kaiba is working on a new version of the KC software. Well, at least somebody maintaining the old site and the new forum. I can't tell you if it's the same guy, or a guy simply going by the same username. The new system claims to be bringing Yu-Gi-Oh! Back to the way it was pre-Xyz monsters, as they compromise the game's integrity and remove skill. Making a simulator for Yu-Gi-Oh! Fans who want to go back to the good old days. I wish the team nothing but the best in their pursuits of making a new simulator, but let's be reasonable here. If you want to play retro Yu-Gi-Oh!, you're at no loss for options. All the way up to the YCS level. Downloading a whole new app just to play like that is not going to go well. Secondly, this is a world where Master Duel exists. Downloading third-party software is going to be a hard sell. Speaking of Konami, though, while all these wars were being fought on the unofficial simulator front, what was Konami themselves doing to fill the need? Well, Yu-Gi-Oh! Online. Yes, even before Virtual Desktop, or similar early simulators like Game King, the very first online way to play Yu-Gi-Oh! Was an officially licensed Konami product, Yu-Gi-Oh! Online. Released in April of 2005, Yu-Gi-Oh! Online was an official simulator that let you connect across the world to duel whoever you want. As far as complexity goes, it was nothing but a simulator. No game to be played alongside it. Simply bought the game and duel. However, something that you would learn very quickly was that the game itself might as well have been free. In fact, depending on if you got it in stores or online, it was free. Monetization is kind of online's lasting legacy, because it's an